Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video, we are going to be reading the conclusion of Wayside Stories from Wayside School. So we'll be beginning today with chapter 28. And as always, I'll be showing you guys any pictures as we come across them, but definitely feel free to follow along. Chapter 28, Nancy. Nancy had big hands and big feet. He didn't like his name. He thought it was a girl's name. None of the other children in Mrs. Jewell's class thought that Nancy's name was odd. They didn't think that it was as a girl's name or as a boy's name. Nancy was just the name of the quiet kid with the big hands and feet who sat over there in the corner next to John. Nancy was very quiet and shy. He was ashamed of his name. He only had one friend, a girl who went to class on the 23rd story of Wayside School. They were friends for a good reason. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. They just called each other, "Hey, you," or just plain, "You." And here's a picture of Nancy. Nancy was afraid to ask his friend what her name was because he might have to tell her his name. He never could figure out why she never asked, but he was happy just to leave well enough alone. One morning, Nancy and his friend were late. When they got to the 23rd story, his friend's teacher was waiting outside. "Hurry up! You're late, Mac," said the teacher. Nancy's friend turned red. She didn't move. "Come on, Mac, shake a leg. Get the lead out," said the teacher. "Your name is Mac?" said Nancy. Mac was very pretty. She had red hair and freckles. She covered her face and ran into the room. "My name is Nancy," Nancy called after her. Mac stepped back outside. "I was ashamed to tell you my name," she said. "Me too," said Nancy. "Nancy's a girl's name." "Oh, I think it's cute," said Mac. "I like the name Mac," said Nancy. "Mac is a boy's name," said Mac. "My mother has a rich aunt named Nancy," said Nancy. "That's why she gave me the name." "My mother once had a dog named Mac," said Mac. "Hey, do you want to trade?" Nancy asked. "Can we?" asked Mac. "I don't see why not," said Nancy. "Okay," said Mac. They both spun around 100 times in opposite directions until they were so dizzy that they fell over. When they stood up, Mac was Nancy and Nancy was Mac. They said goodbye. Then Mac raced up to Mrs. Jewell's room. He was no longer shy. "Hi, everybody. My name's Mac," he announced. "I traded names." He held out his big hand. Todd jumped up and shook it. "Hi, Mac," he said. "Glad to meet you." "How you doing, Mac?" said Ron. "Howdy, Mac," said Terrence. "Nice to meet you, Mac," said Beebe. "You traded names?" asked Jason. Jason didn't like his name either. "That's right, Jason, old boy," said Mac. "Is that allowed?" asked Jason. "Why not?" said Mac. "Hey, anybody want to trade?" Jason called. "I'll trade with you," said Terrence. He didn't like his name either. "Wait, I'll trade with you, Terrence," said Mauricia. Mauricia didn't like her name. "No, he's trading with me," said Jason. "I'll trade with you, Mauricia," said Damien. "No thanks," said Mauricia. "I'll trade with you, Damien," said Mrs. Jewels. "No, I want to be Mrs. Jewels," said Stephen. It turned out that nobody in Mrs. Jewell's class liked his name. The children all spun around in different directions until they got so dizzy and they all fell over. And when they stood up again, nobody knew who anybody was. "What are we going to do, Mrs. Jewels?" asked Leslie, who was really Eric Bacon. "My name is not Mrs. Jewels, it's Mauricia," answered Terrence, who was really Jason. "It is not. I'm Mauricia," said Dee Dee, who was really Joe. "You're both wrong," said Mauricia. "I'm Mrs. Jewels." This went on for an hour. At last they figured out who the real Rondi was. She was missing her 2 front teeth. After they figured out Rondi, they were able to get Allison pretty easily. And then from there, they got DJ, Damien, and Mrs. Jewels. She was the oldest one. Eventually they figured out who everybody really was. They had some difficulty deciding which Eric was which, and actually they are still not absolutely sure. Everybody just decided to keep his own name. The children didn't like them, but it made things much easier. Mac and Nancy kept their new names, but when they were together, they still called each other, "Hey, you," or just plain, "you." Chapter 29. Stefan. Stefan had green hair. He had purple ears and a blue face. He wore his sister's pink dancing shoes and green leotards. The leotards matched his hair. He was all dressed up as a goblin for Mrs. Jewell's Halloween party. But unfortunately, it wasn't Halloween. "Ha ha ha! You look so stupid," said Jason. Jason was Stefan's best friend. "So do you," said Stefan. "Boy, are you dumb," said Jenny. "Halloween is on Sunday. Today is only Friday." "You're the one who's dumb," said Stefan. "Ha ha! You'd probably come to school on Sunday," Mrs. Jewell said if we'd have to have the party today. But none of the other children wore costumes, only Stefan. "All right, class," said Mrs. Jewell. "It's time for our Halloween party." "See," said Stefan. Mrs. Jewell gave each child a cookie that looked like an orange with a witch with a black hat. She laughed when she saw Stefan and forgot to give him one. Stefan didn't ask for it. He was afraid that she'd laugh again. The children finished their cookies in less than 30 seconds. "All right, class," said Mrs. Jewell. "The party is over. We have a lot of work to do." Still, Stefan felt like a fool. The party lasted less than a minute, and he had to spend the rest of the day wearing his stupid goblin suit. "Look, Stefan's wearing his sister's leotards," laughed Dana. "They're green just like his hair," said Fatso. Everybody laughed. Mrs. Jewell began the arithmetic lesson. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 5. "That's wrong," Joy shouted. Mrs. Jewell tried again. 2 plus 2 equals 3? That wasn't right either. She added 2 and 2 again and got 43. It was useless. No matter how hard she tried, she could not get 2 plus 2 equal to 4. "I don't understand it," she said. "They've always equaled 4 before." Suddenly she screamed. The chalk turned into a squiggling worm. She dropped it on her foot. Then all the lights went out and the blackboard lit up like a movie screen. A woman appeared on the screen. She had a long tongue and pointed ears. She stepped off the screen and into the classroom. It was the ghost of Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf ran her fingernails across the blackboard. "Trick or treat, rotten kids," she said. "Now I'll get even with every last one of you. Where's Todd?" "Who's that?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "Mrs. Gorf," said Damien. "Who's Mrs. Gorf?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "She was the meanest teacher we ever had," said Rondi. "What happened to her?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "Louis ate her," said Jason. "Well, I'm not going to allow this," said Mrs. Jewell. "Get out of my classroom," she demanded. "It's Halloween, sweet teacher," said Mrs. Gorf. "Ghosts can go anywhere they like. I've come for a little class reunion." "But it isn't Halloween," said Mrs. Jewell. "Halloween is still 2 days away." "I know," said Mrs. Gorf, "but Halloween falls on a Sunday this year, so we are celebrating on the Friday before." Stefan leapt up from his seat. "See, I was right," he said. "Today is the day we celebrate it, the Friday before. Mrs. Gorf proved it." He ran up to Mrs. Gorf. "They all laughed at me and made me feel stupid because I was the only one who got dressed up. But they were the ones who were wrong. You and I are right." He put his arms around Mrs. Gorf and hugged her. Mrs. Gorf gasped and disappeared. The lights came back on. Mrs. Jewell picked up a piece of chalk from the floor. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 4. "That's good," she said. "When 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, anything can happen." All the children who had laughed at Stefan now called him a hero, but they told him to change out of his stupid costume. So at lunch, Stefan went home, washed up, and changed. He came back wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt. Of course, his hair was still green. It always was. Chapter 30. Louis. Louis had a red face and a mustache of many colors. He was the yard teacher at Wayside School. It was his job to see that the children didn't have too much fun during lunch and recess. And if you haven't already guessed, he is the one who wrote this book. On June 10th, there was a blizzard. Louis was afraid that the children wouldn't have would have too much fun, so nobody was allowed outside. Class, said Mrs. Jules, after you finish your lunch today, come back up to the classroom. You are not allowed outside. The children all went to the lunchroom. Miss Mush had made tuna surprise. They looked at it, then hurried back up the stairs. And here's a picture of Louis, the yard teacher. There was nothing to do. Now, class, said Mrs. Jules, I know that you are all bored, but I have a special surprise for you. I hope it's better than the tuna surprise, said Mauricia. Mrs. Jules continued, Louis is going to come up and entertain us. He will tell us a story. Now I want you all to be on your best behavior. When Louis walked in, all the children booed. Are you going to tell us a story? Asked Bibi. Yes, said Louis. Well, it better be good, Bibi warned. It better be better than the tuna surprise, said Butterfingers. I thought the tuna surprise was good, said Louis. You'd eat dirt if they put enough ketchup on it, said Mac. Hey, everybody, be quiet, said Todd. Let him tell the story. Not too loud, Louis, said Sherry. I'm trying to get some sleep. Louis sat in the middle of the room, and all the children gathered around. Louis began his story. This is the story about a school, very much like this one. But before we get started, there is something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. In this school, every classroom is on the same story. Which one? The 18th? Asked Jenny. No, said Louis. They are all on the ground. The school is only one story high. Not much of a school, laughed Damien. Louis continued. Now you might think the children there are strange and silly. That is probably true. However, when I told them the stories about you, they thought that you were strange and silly. Us? The children answered. How are we strange? I'm normal, said Stephen. Aren't I? As normal as I am, Joe assured him. The children at the school must be crazy, said Leslie. Real lullis, Mauricia agreed. Tell us about them, Louis, Bibi demanded. For one thing, Louis said, none of these children have ever been turned into an apple. That's silly, said Dee Dee. Everyone's been turned into an apple. It's part of growing up. Louis continued, dead rats don't walk into classrooms wearing raincoats. What do they wear? Tuxedos? Asked Todd. And girls never try to sell their toes, Louis added. Well, no wonder, said Leslie, at today's prices. Louis continued, they don't trade names or read upside down. They can't turn mosquito bites into numbers. They don't count the hairs on their heads. The walls don't laugh, and 2 plus 2 always equals 4. How horrible, said Damien. That's not the worst of it, said Louis. They have never tasted Mauritia-flavored ice cream. A hush fell over the classroom. Mrs. Jules, I'm scared, said Allison. Is there really a school like that? Of course not, said Mrs. Jules. Louis was just telling a story. It was a good story, said Leslie. I thought it was stupid, said Kathy. I liked it, said Rondi. It was funny. Mrs. Jules said, Louis, it was a very entertaining story, but we really go into fairy tales here. I'm trying to teach my class the truth. That's all right, said Louis. I have to go down to room 29 now and tell them a story. He started out the door. Class, said Mrs. Jules, let's all thank Louis for his wonderful story. Everyone booed. And that is the end of Wayside Stories from Wayside School. I really hope you guys enjoyed this story. Like I said, very funny and bizarre and in a strange, funny, goofy way. But I hope to see you guys in my next read-along. And as always, please take good care of yourselves. And thank you so much for watching.